Chapter 14. The morning light filtered weakly through the high, narrow windows of the chamber. The scent of damp stone lingered in the air, mingling with the faint traces of crushed herbs. Marcus sat propped against the cool marble wall, his body still aching, but no longer screaming in pain. His jaw, though set and bound, was no longer the searing mass of agony it had been. The worst of the pain had dulled, replaced by a low, persistent throb. The physician stood near the door, packing his leather satchel with practiced efficiency. He was an older man with a thin frame and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. His expression was neutral, neither kind nor cruel, just another Roman doing his duty. Brutus stood nearby, arms crossed, his eyes distant as if his mind was already elsewhere. "Twice a day," the physician murmured, his voice low but clear. "Crushed fennel and willow bark. It will keep the swelling down." Brutus gave a curt nod, barely acknowledging the words. "He'll be ready," Brutus said simply. The physician paused for a moment, his eyes flicking toward Marcus. There was a brief hesitation, as if he wanted to say something more, but he thought better of it. With a slight bow of his head, he turned and left the chamber, his footsteps fading down the stone corridor. Silence followed. Brutus remained where he was for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then, without looking at Marcus, he spoke. "Get him clean," Brutus said quietly, but the command carried the weight of expectation. "Dressed properly." Marcus's head lifted slightly, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Fine linens," Brutus added, almost as an afterthought. "Something befitting my household." Marcus's heart thudded dully in his chest. Fine linens. Not the rags he had been given. Not the coarse tunic of a servant. This was something different. Why? Brutus finally turned, his gaze settling on Marcus with cool indifference. "You'll walk beside me today," Brutus said, his tone leaving no room for question. "And I won't have you looking like a stray dog." Marcus didn't speak, he only nodded, his jaw too stiff to risk unnecessary words. The sun was higher by the time Marcus stepped into the streets of Rome, his body freshly washed, his skin scrubbed clean, and the fine linen tunic brushing softly against his bruised frame. The unfamiliar sensation of smooth fabric against his skin was almost unsettling after so many weeks of grime and blood. But it was the city that stole his breath. Rome. The Rome of his childhood. The streets, though crowded, were just as he remembered, filled with merchants shouting their wares, slaves hurrying with baskets of fruit, and soldiers patrolling with stern faces and sharp eyes. The scent of baked bread and roasted meat mingled with the acrid bite of smoke and the earthy tang of the Tiber drifting on the breeze. Marcus's feet moved automatically, his mind flashing with memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He had walked these streets once. He had known the feel of the smooth marble beneath his sandals, the hum of life that pulsed through the city like a living heartbeat. But now he walked beside Brutus. A name he had known, but only distantly. His family had spoken of Brutus with respect. Marcus Junius Brutus, the son of Servilia, a man tied to Caesar but never fully trusted. But Brutus had been a name spoken in passing, a figure who belonged to the world of his father and uncles, never someone Marcus expected to know. And yet, here he was, walking beside Brutus, dressed in fine cloth but bearing the mark of a slave. The weight of the chain around his neck was gone, but Marcus felt it all the same. They wound their way through the heart of Rome, moving past towering columns and bustling courtyards until they reached a familiar stretch of the city. Marcus's steps faltered. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes fell on the marble walls that loomed ahead, gleaming under the midday sun. Tall columns flanked the entrance, carved with intricate designs that spoke of power and lineage. The gates, adorned with symbols of Caesar's victories, opened silently as Brutus approached. Marcus knew this place. It was not just a villa, it was a symbol. A place where power was nurtured, where ambition was sharpened behind closed doors. His father had spoken of it in hushed tones. "The house of the Julii," he had once murmured, his voice laced with respect and caution. Marcus's pulse quickened. He had never stood inside these walls, but he had known what they represented. Brutus said nothing as they stepped into the cool embrace of the villa. The scent of jasmine lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of burning incense. The floors gleamed with polished marble, and frescoes depicting scenes of Roman triumph adorned the walls. Servants moved silently, their eyes lowered as they passed. Brutus walked ahead with quiet confidence, leading Marcus deeper into the heart of the house, where decisions that shaped Rome were made. Octavian stood near a marble fountain in the atrium, his expression composed but his eyes sharp and assessing. But Marcus didn't need an introduction. Gaius Octavian. The name echoed in Marcus's mind, but he kept his gaze lowered, his posture straight, knowing his place. Brutus. Octavian greeted, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone of curiosity. You came. Brutus gave a curt nod, his face a mask of control. We need to talk. Octavian's eyes flicked briefly to Marcus, taking in the fine tunic and the lingering evidence of Marcus's suffering. His expression remained neutral, but Marcus saw it, the flicker of recognition. Alone? Octavian asked, his voice soft but pointed. Brutus shook his head. He stays. Octavian's brow lifted, but he said nothing more. Come, he gestured toward a shaded alcove where two couches faced each other. Brutus sat without hesitation, and Marcus moved to stand just behind him, his posture straight, but his gaze low, invisible but present. The conversation began with pleasantries, mentions of Caesar's victories in Gaul, the riches that poured into the city as a result. But then the air shifted. Footsteps echoed softly from the corridor beyond. Marcus's eyes flicked upward, just enough to catch the shadow that approached. A woman. She moved with grace, her steps measured and deliberate. Her tunic was of the finest silk, draped elegantly over her shoulders, and her hair was arranged in elaborate curls that spoke of wealth and status. Atia. Marcus had never met her, but he had heard of her. Atia of the Julii, the niece of Caesar and the mother of Octavian. Mother, Octavian murmured softly, his tone respectful but tinged with caution. Atia's eyes swept the room, cool and assessing. She gave Brutus a slight nod, her expression carefully neutral. Brutus, she said, her tone smooth but carrying a subtle edge. How unexpected. Brutus rose, his posture stiff, but he inclined his head slightly in deference. Atia. Her eyes lingered on Marcus for a moment, long enough to notice the fine linens and the bruises hidden beneath them. A faint flicker of something, curiosity, amusement, passed through her gaze before she turned her attention back to Brutus. I assume you've come to discuss current events, Atia murmured, her tone light, but her words heavy with meaning. Brutus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Atia's smile was faint, almost indulgent, as though she were speaking to a child who had not yet learned the rules of the game. Have you heard? She said softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Caesar has declared himself Dictator Perpetuo. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Dictator for life. Marcus didn't move, but he felt the weight of it settle over the room. Brutus's face remained carefully composed, but Marcus saw the subtle shift, the clench of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. Atia's smile didn't falter. Rome celebrates her hero, she continued, her voice silk over steel. But heroes are dangerous, aren't they? Brutus's eyes darkened, but he gave a polite nod. Indeed. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment no one spoke. Brutus's silence was louder than any words. They left the villa, stepping back into the bustling streets of Rome. But Brutus didn't turn toward his own home. Marcus kept pace, his eyes flicking to the familiar landmarks as they moved deeper into the heart of the city. They stopped before another grand domus, a place where the scent of incense mingled with the weight of unspoken power. Marcus's stomach tightened. Brutus didn't speak, but Marcus understood. They weren't visiting a friend. Brutus was gathering allies,